as chief political writer at Spiked Online. And Brendan, I mean, every now and then I think we do find we disagree on some things, and I'm quite relieved to find that we have some differing opinions, but you have been an absolute, I mean, trailblazer on this issue, calling an awful lot of the issues out in terms of the security of this country, and particularly the Islamist threat, far before most commentators have done. All credit to you on that, but it's not very nice being proved right, is it?
No, not at all. And, you know, when I hear people saying the real problem in this country is the far right, or the real problem is middle-aged white men, that's what we hear from Gary Neville and people like that, I just want to give them a clap around the ear, because the fact of the matter is, of course, there's a problem with the far right. Of course, there's a problem with other forms of extremism, but radical Islam is the biggest threat that this country faces. I think 100 people now in the past 20 years have been killed in radical Islamist violent attacks. That's a really large number of people. That includes children as well, of course. We've got to take it more seriously, but we live under a political establishment that not only doesn't want to talk about radical Islam, it won't even say the I word. It never even says Islamist. You know, they won't call.
It's got nothing. No, it's got nothing to do with Islam, they'll say. I mean, they genuinely. It's not. I mean, it is a radical political ideology that has grown in recent decades, and there are, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of Muslims who live completely, you know, peaceful, normal lives, are no threat to anybody. But pretend that there isn't this radicalised, dangerous political ideological Islam, and that it's not massively influential across the Middle East and Africa, is madness. I mean, it's head in sand stuff.
Complete madness and complete moral cowardice, just a real institutionalized cowardice where they can't even name the problem that we face, far less come up with solutions for tackling it. I remember after the Manchester Arena bombing in 2017, no one would say the word Islamist, never mind Islam, no one would say Islamist, and it was obviously an Islamist attack. I remember Andy Burnham back then said there's no room in our city for extremists, and
there is.
And Morrissey at the time said, an extremist what? Was it an extremist cat? You know, what are we talking about here?
And he wrote a song also about how, you know, I'm absolutely nonsense, and the idiots say, or something, you know, don't look back in anger. You know, I'm absolutely going to look back in anger. I remember saying that on air on this very station that very day. I'll absolutely be angry about it. It is extraordinary, isn't it? Look, we've found out more and more and more about this this killer. Thankfully dead himself. Hooray! Let's celebrate. You should sometimes celebrate some people being dead. It's a good thing. Jihad Al-Shamie will no longer be able to be a threat to people. Syrian-born himself, brought to this country, was very young, came with his parents, became a British citizen. He had followed a hate preacher who called Jews animals. He had been massively radicalised online. He'd been very open to many people about his radicalisation. He had made death threats to the local MP. It was reported to the police. Police didn't even bother interviewing him. He was out on bail for an alleged rape. I mean, the clues were there, and yet not on a watch list, not interviewed by the police. I mean, even the fact that his father, who had come here and been, you know, presumably had British nationality and still here, Faraj Al-Shamie, working in the NHS, he had publicly, openly on his social media praised the October 7th attackers as heroic. I mean, it's not like people are even plotting secretly, quietly in their bedrooms. They're open and blatant about it, whether it's on social media, whether it's on the streets at these marches. And we're told that we're a tolerant society, but we shouldn't be tolerant of intolerance, should we?
We certainly should not be tolerant of any Islamist plotting or anti-Semitism or any form of hatred that can lead to violence. And that's exactly what we had in this story that we've seen in over the past few days. You know, some people are still saying we can't be sure what his motive was. I mean, his name is Jihad, and he went to a synagogue to commit an extraordinary act of violence. I think we can be pretty clear.
On the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. I mean, there were clues, Brendan. There were clues.
There were clues. This was an act of radical Islamist anti-Semitic terrorism. But you know, Julia, you make a really important point, which is that a lot of this stuff is happening out in the open. It's right out there. And the reason that can happen is because there has been the slow burn of anti-Semitism in this country for the past 2 years. We've seen synagogues being graffitied. We've seen a Jewish girl had a bottle thrown at her in Stamford Hill. Jewish kids at the Jewish Free School in London were told to take off their blazers on the way to and from school so no one would know they were Jews. There's been a spike in anti-Semitic attacks. It's gone on, and some of us, including you, begged officialdom to take this more seriously, begged the opinion forming classes to talk about it more, and too many of them turned a blind eye. And then the end result is this horrific act we saw in Manchester. And
that's the thing, that is the end result. It was always going to happen. I wrote a piece to The Sun. I know I've read some pieces you've written as well. You know, I don't know why the Prime Minister was saying he was shocked. You know, I wasn't shocked. Everyone knew it was a question of when and not if. But this is the thing. When you've got people like even, you know, cabinet ministers, you know, like David Lammy talking about genocide in Israel, when you've got the lies that are on the BBC, Sky and ITV, but I hold BBC particularly to account because we have to pay their wages and because they are such a trusted international broadcaster that when they say things, it comes with more weight and gives succor to everyone else. When they push the, let's face it, the Palestinian agenda over and above the facts and report the war in Gaza as if it's some uniquely horrific experience, when they know it's not. It's war, and in fact that the ratio of civilian deaths to combatant deaths is actually one of the lowest ever. I mean, I know has been a war with a lower death rate of civilians compared to those who are armed, and they know all this, and they repeat Hamas talking points. They play their videos and they play along with it. They create an environment in this country and across Europe and in America, on campuses, on the streets, everywhere, where it becomes acceptable to be angry at the people who support an Israeli state, a Jewish state, because they're the nasty genocidal baby killers who are starving people en masse. And one of the things shouted by Jihad Al-Shamie when we were trying to get into the synagogue in Manchester, and these brave souls were holding the door against him, was you know, this is for the children, this is the babies. Now, how much responsibility do, you know, government ministers like David Lammy, who frankly the booing and jeering of him when he went to a vigil was absolutely well deserved. How much do the BBC, the ministers and all of those who have played along with Hamas propaganda for the last 2 years, how much responsibility do they have for this?
A huge amount, I would say. And when I read that Jihad Al-Shamie said that as he was pushing against the door, he said, "This is for the children you killed," it chilled me to my bone, because I've written a few pieces over the past 2 years basically saying to everyone, please don't resuscitate the blood libel about Jews killing children. Please stop doing that, because we've seen demonstration after demonstration at which people have holding up placards saying the Jewish state murders children. We've seen demonstrations where people have carried dolls covered in blood and held them up in the faces of Orthodox Jews in Essex and other parts of the country. We've seen people breathe life back into the idea that the Jews take pleasure in killing kids. And the BBC has helped that along, because they broadcast the lie that thousands of kids would die in the next 36 hours if aid didn't get into Gaza.
That was a claim made by a big charity head, but they didn't question it at all.
They didn't question it. It went out. Everyone believed it. It spread like wildfire through the internet, and it wasn't true. There's this constant refrain that the Jewish state is uniquely murderous, uniquely barbaric, and uniquely invested in the death of children. Now, people say there's a difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, but let me tell you this. If you demonize the world's only Jewish state in that way, that will impact on Jewish people. You can't go around calling the Jewish nation the most barbarous nation on earth and then be surprised when Jewish civilians and citizens across the world get it in the neck as well.
Here's my question. When you get, I'm not going to name names, or I probably should, because, sue me for libel, because I reckon I'd win this one. But when some very senior figures at the BBC who are on air every morning, every evening, and really, I'm talking about long-standing presenters, people who've worked in war, as war reporters, they've seen every horror under the sun. When they report on what's happening in Gaza, not from Gaza, and they make complaints about that, but it's a war, it's a war zone. Whenever we've seen people in war zones before at the front line, and it's a tiny slip of land, it's all the front line. By the way, they've always been embedded with allied forces rather than actually being able to roam freely. That's not happening in most wars. When they report on this stuff as if it is a uniquely appalling war with unique suffering, when, you know, just down the road you've got, you know, Yemen and Sudan and everywhere else where people are being slaughtered indiscriminately by government forces. When they do that, do you think they know that they're lying, or do you think they are now so caught up in that, you know, the virtue signalling, flag waving, middle class lefty viewpoint, that they don't even realise that they are just repeating Hamas propaganda? Because I don't believe that they think what they're saying is true. I don't believe that people who've been war reporters for 20 years or however long don't know the realities on the ground.
It's so hard to tell, isn't it? Because it's possible that they've been so swept along by their own sense of self-righteousness that they really do believe it, that they really have become unable to see the reality, the truth, the more complex picture, that, you know, even to look coolly at what happened on the 7th of October and how barbaric that was.
Were women raped? I mean, God, we haven't got a video of the actual women being raped, they claim. I think there actually are videos of that, which Hamas put out themselves, but there we are. But we have a questioning of things that are so obviously that did happen. It's terrifying.
Yeah. And, you know, the BBC, if you look at the BBC, for example, I'm not a dyed-in-the-wool BBC basher. I think it does some good stuff, and I think it does some rubbish stuff. But what it's done in relation to Israel-Gaza is unforgivable, because what it has done, it has pumped into the homes of this country every night for 2 years the following two messages. Firstly, this is the only war on earth. It's the only one you should think about. Nothing else is happening. Don't look at anything else. And the second thing it has said is that this is the worst war ever. It is uniquely barbarous. Children are dying left, right, and center. It's an absolute disgrace. It's given that dishonest message, that skewed message, to people across the UK every night for 2 years. That is an unforgivable disavowal of its responsibility to tell the truth, and it hasn't told the truth.
That's the thing, isn't it? What do you make of this bid to ban repeated protests by, you know, the pro-Hamas crew, which is what they are? Because you know, you and I are both big advocates of free speech. You are more of a free speech libertarian than I am, even. I for a good year defended the right of these protests to go ahead, but it's more and more become obvious to me, even during that first year after October the 7th, the fact that the first march was organised while the massacre in Israel was still taking place. But you know, mothers were, you know, were clutching their children being burnt to death in their kibbutz homes while they would go, oh, can we have a march? Because we're worried about Gaza. Like, and I had no idea if soldier had even set foot into Gaza at that point. But they carried on. The anti-Semitic, you know, as you said, that the placards, the chants, you know, globalise the Intifada, from the rivers to the sea. That means both of those mean kill Jews and annihilate Israel. Should they be banned, or do the police have enough powers already to be banned, or should they bring in more laws? Where do you stand on all of that?
I'm not in favour of banning them, and it kind of sticks in my throat to say that, because I think they are obscene and obnoxious, and I think we have to be honest. I think they are anti-Semitic marches. Yep. That's what they are. And you know what, I think it's dawning on more people that that's the reality. You know, for 2 years now, these people have said we're on the right side of history, we are perfectly righteous, we are marching against genocide and for the poor people of Gaza, and they've got away with everything. But I think more and more ordinary people, even non-political people who I know, are starting to say, you know, what's going on here? Why are they still marching? Why did they march on the day that 2 Jews were killed in Manchester? More and more people are starting to ask that question. But the reason I'm not in favor of banning them is just because I think that would give the state too much power. And if it has the power to ban repeat protests, we know what it will go for next. It will go for pink ladies standing outside migrant hotels. It will go for those who are protesting against causes that the government is really scared about, like the question of migration and so on. So I'm worried about state overreach as a solution.
Here's the thing, though. I mean, we know we've seen two-tier justice, two-tier policing. We've seen an awful lot of that in the last couple of years. There's no doubt at all in my mind that if there was the same level of criminality and arrests and, you know, and outrageous racist slurs, that were being held up on banners and behaviour of the people, and it was on the Tommy Robinson, Night at the Kingdom style march, that would definitely be banned. We know that the Home Office already has the powers to ban marches. We know that 13 marches were banned over a 7-year period up to 2015. 10 of those 13 were EDL and other far-right marches. So we know they can do it if they want, if they believe there is going to be, breaches of the peace, public order and all of that. The only reason we don't see mass violence and trouble at these marches is because the police, they basically provide as you go, feel free, carry on walking past service, rather than actually policing. If they policed these marches in the way that they should, as the law dictates, these wouldn't be peaceful marches. We can see that. Matthew Syed, who's absolutely lovely man, and very couldn't meet someone more polite and more reasonable. He said, amazing piece in the papers the weekend, where he went along to the march on Saturday and was asking people, why are you here? And do you think, asking perfectly reasonable journalistic questions. And he's got a very nice manner. He's not a trouble stirrer. He said the aggression, the anger that he heard, he's left in no doubt at all. He spoke to 24 people and he said, 22 of those 24 people were aggressive and angry and were basically shouting, let's face it, anti-Semitic things. We wouldn't allow this about any other group. If someone organised a march where they were saying the same things and had the same level of aggression about black people or about Muslims, it wouldn't be allowed. So why? Why is this allowed?
It's funny, I walked past one of these demonstrations a few weeks back, and I'm not quite as polite as Matthew Syed.
Yeah, I couldn't go because I know that I would not. I would end the day in a police cell. I know that.
Well, I screamed out F Hamas just to a bunch of people. I got hit. Someone hit me with his walking stick, just an old fella, so it wasn't that bad. I got surrounded by a bunch of young lads in keffiyehs who were pushing me and telling me to F off. That was the response to me saying something about Hamas. So I turned around to these people and said, hold on, so do you support Hamas? Of course they do support Hamas. It's a rhetorical question. But you're absolutely right that the police already have powers, and the police, I'm afraid to say, I know they've got a hard job and they've got lots on their plate, but they have behaved badly in relation to these demonstrations. Do you remember on one of the early demonstrations shortly after 7th of October, there was a gang of radical Islamists chanting for jihad against the Jewish state. And the police put out a statement saying, well, jihad can have many different meanings. It means struggle, it means sacrifice. They made excuses for incitement to violence rather than policing it. So I do think they already have powers to stop a breach of the peace, to stop people inciting violence, but they haven't used those powers on these marches, and that's what worries me most.
As is always the case, actually, when any government, and the Tories and Labour, they're just as bad as each other, let's bring in more powers. Nearly always it's a case of the powers they've already got not being used. Can I ask you just finally about Gary Neville? We had all the issues, didn't we, with Gary Lineker, who's working at the BBC, giving his tuppence worth, knowing absolutely sod all about anything other than football. I don't mind him giving his views, but he just can't work at the BBC while he spouts his absolute nonsense while I'm having to pay his wages, and he's got a contract saying he can't spout political views. But Sky Sports got a problem now with Gary Neville, who's always in trouble. Whether it's the courts or with the newspapers or whoever, over things he said. But he's at £1.1 million a year. There's a boycott call against Sky Sports for continuing to employ him over what people are calling a racist outburst. We did this long video about the union and the England flags that are being hung up everywhere, and saying this is divisive. This is posted, by the way, since the attack on the Manchester synagogue, and he said this is all being, the division is being created by angry middle-aged white men. Should he? Is it okay for him to say that? Is that racist? If he said angry middle-aged Muslim men or angry middle-aged black men, would people be defending him? And should Sky Sports face a boycott?
I think it is racist. He's judging people by their race, and he's making a sweeping generalization about a group of people with a particular skin color. Imagine if after the Manchester synagogue attack, someone, me or you, were to say, the problem is young brown men. We wouldn't say that because we don't believe that. The problem is a certain group of radicalized people that exist in this community and in other communities too. So he made a sweeping generalization about a certain race, a certain group, and I think that's a problem. But again, it speaks to that cowardice, just that unwillingness among these champagne socialists to face up to the reality of the divisions that have been caused by multiculturalism, the fact that there is a particular problem of radicalism among young Muslims, and we should be allowed to say it,
Yep.
It's this racial paternalism. He feels he has to protect Muslim community from criticism or black community from criticism.
Yeah.
That's a kind of racial paternalism in and of itself. You know, middle-aged white men get so much flack, but they're not actually doing the bad stuff.
Yeah, I don't think that most people are actually terrified of the middle-aged white men, you know, coming at them in the streets and attempting to kill them in their places of worship. Brendan O'Neill covered a lot of ground there. Chief political writer at Spiked Online. He's also the author of the brilliant book After the Pogrom, 7th of October, Israel and the Crisis of Civilization.